left for the holidays. So we're just really glad to have Andrei here anytime, because Andrei is one of the premier experts on business state relations in Russia. It's hard to think of anybody who I would rather have talk on this topic. For those of you who don't know Andrei, he's visiting fellow at Davis Center and the Hansa Wissenschaft Kolleg. But he was also, for a long time, a key figure in the development of the Higher School of Economics when it reached its peak. I had the pleasure of working with Andrei for 10 years at the Higher School of Economics at the International Center for the Study of Institutions and Development as co-director. We think we accomplished a little bit there, I hope. And I've also had the pleasure of knowing Andrei since 1992. So we go way back. And I'm always learned when Andrei speaks. So I will be all ears, and I hope you will be too. Andrei will speak for roughly 30 minutes. If you have clarifying questions, please raise your hand. If you have more substantive questions, please hold them to the end, and we'll have a discussion, including with folks online. Okay? So please join me in welcoming Andrei Alexandrovich Yakovlev.
So thank you for this introduction. I'm really glad to be here. As Tim told, we really worked together for a long time. Yeah. And in my view, this International Center for the Study of Institutions Development was really a very great project with actually quite important outcomes in terms of new generation of scholars in this field, yeah. Both in Russia and in the US too. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. Concerning my topic of my presentation today, actually, it was motivated in some sense by discussions of last 2 years about resistance of Russian economy under this huge, really huge and quite strong international sanctions introduced after large-scale invasion into Ukraine. Because quite many experts, not only here in the US or in Europe, but also in Russia, expected a much deeper decline of Russian economy, even some kind of collapse of Russian economy during first months after introduction of sanctions. But we can see that reality is very different. And even in 2022, decline was much smaller comparing to all expectations. But during the last 2 years, in 2023, 2024, we can see even some kind of economic growth in Russia. So, and I tried to explain all this puzzle, of course, taking into account some previous research, but mostly focusing on one hand, composition of different groups in the Russian elite, and first of all, interactions between business and government, not only now, but also during 2 decades before. Because in my view, this resistance or stability of Russian economy can be explained mostly by behavior of different actors, actually on both sides, on the side of business and on the side of government. So, no, maybe I will not provide huge references to previous research, especially because Tim they did a lot of things in this field, especially, for instance, this point about elite exchange. It is a reference to actually one of the most cited papers of Tim, published in 2022 in European Studies. So the idea that yes, there are some phenomena of state capture and corruption and so on in Russian economy, but at the same time, mostly it is about some kind of exchange between actors on business side and actors on government side. And therefore, reality is a bit more complicated comparing to some kind of mainstream approaches. But nevertheless, no, I mentioned here also main actors and maybe some kind of difference to even some my previous research is that it is not only about top-level bureaucracy, oligarchs, and so-called siloviki or security agency officers and so on. But it is also about large international business, because in my view, this business played quite important role in 2000s and 2010s. Now it's already not so, but before it was quite significant. Also, it is about over private business on one hand. And regarding actors on government side, before many scholars, including me, told mostly about some kind of top-level bureaucracy or economic cabinet and siloviki or security cabinet. But in reality, in my view, it's necessary to talk separately about Kremlin, because Putin, and not only Putin, but also some kind of group of people around him, are not associated with economic cabinet and also not associated fully with security cabinet. It's some kind of separate unit. And also, it's necessary to talk about regional authorities, regional governors. They played important role in 90s. Just now, some scholars, for instance, Nikolai Petrov, told that they are only nomenclatura, they are not playing any significant role and so on. In my view, it's not so. And if we will talk especially about future, it's necessary to take into account the specificity of the sectors. Main point for all this previous research is that in some sense it was balance between business and government with different conditions for this most informal agreement. For instance, if you will talk about 2000s, especially after 2003, 2004, after Yugoslavia affair, the main component of this informal agreement between business and government were related on one hand to non-participation of business in any political activity not approved directly by Kremlin. But on the other hand, Kremlin promised not to revise privatization results on one hand. And from this point of view, Yuka's case could be considered as some kind of exception. It was signal for over businesses that if you will not follow Khodorkovsky and so on, you can be safe. But another important point, in my view, is about overall conditions for doing business. Because, for instance, just now there is a lot of discussions about increase in salaries in Russia, and labor force became quite expensive now. It's true, but it was totally different during 2 decades before. And in my view, this cheap labor force was also, in some sense, element of this informal agreement between Kremlin and business. And it was the source of rent, not only for oligarchs, but for every business. And for instance, all specialists in this field know it, for instance, trade unions in Russia historically were very weak. But they played some role in the 90s with all these strikes, in Kuzbas and so on and so on. But situation was totally different in 2000s. Because all these trade unions were controlled by government, and the government really provided some kind of beneficial conditions for business. In my view, it was the element or part of this informal agreement between business and Kremlin, especially in 2000s. In 2010s, in my view, situation changed a bit because, especially after 2011, 2012, after these political protests, Kremlin started to change overall policy, not only in terms of repressions against opposition, but also in terms of some kind of new course to self-isolation. It became very clear after 2022, but already after 2014, it also became visible. Because before, also some kind of element of this informal agreement between business and Kremlin was about integration of Russian economy into global economy, with some opportunities provided for business. After 2014, this situation started to change, but in exchange, Kremlin started to provide some kind of access to additional rent for Russian business inside Russia. For instance, in the forms of this food embargo and so on. also in terms of some kind of support for domestic investment. It was quite interesting to see, especially after 2012, this initiative personally announced by Putin about improvement of positions of Russia in doing business ranking. Yeah, because in 2011, Russia was at 120th place, yeah, and in 2012, just before presidential elections and after political process of 2011, yeah, Putin personally announced that it will be special governmental program with idea to improve conditions for doing business and improve positions of Russia in this doing business ranking. And the idea was to reach 20th position in 2018. It was not achieved finally, but it was 29th position in 2019. Yeah, it was last year of this the doing business ranking produced by World Bank. In any case, it was a really impressive improvement. Yeah, it's true. Again, it was mostly about some kind of technical conditions for doing business, but it was, in my view, again, some kind of element or component of this informal agreement between Kremlin and business in 2010s. Nevertheless, this war in 2022, in my view, changed significantly this balance created during previous decades. It provided really huge damages for many players. But at the same time, it provided significant benefits for some other players. And also, it's quite visible that bargaining power of economic cabinet and regional authorities declined quite significantly, because before we can talk about this balance, not only in terms of some negotiations between business and government, but also in terms of some kind of internal negotiations between economic cabinet and security cabinet inside the government. Okay, but maybe main point of this slide is about current equilibrium. The parameters of this equilibrium are still not clear. And in this presentation, I will try to show main factor of changes and driving forces behind them, and also I will discuss some possible options for the future. So it is about some description, yeah, maybe, of Russian economy before 2022. No, actually, especially for political scientists, yeah, like Tim, because I'm an economist. Yeah, it's quite difficult to talk about hybrid regimes. Yeah, with some kind of mix of democracy, authoritarian rules, and so on, electoral autocracies, and so on and so on. If we will talk about economy, maybe it's not so obvious approach, but in my view, this resistance of Russian economy during the last 2 years can be explained exactly by some kind of hybridity of economic model implemented in Russia during 20 years under Putin before 2022. And here on left side, I mentioned some kind of theoretical concept describing political economy regimes. No, and here I provided especially some references to a variety of capitalism concept in international political economy. It's quite popular. So, and for instance, about liberal market economies or coordinated market economies, it is exactly from this famous book of yeah, published 20 years ago. Yeah. Regarding state capture, it was a huge number of papers and books describing this phenomena for Russia and also for other developing countries. Yeah. Regarding predatory and or mafia state, yeah, no, mafia state it is a concept proposed by Magyar and Moldovich, yeah, especially for Hungary, but with some kind of broader application for our transition economies. A predatory state it is a much broader concept. And in my view, mafia state it is some kind of element of predatory state in the framework. No, regarding development state, no, here I mentioned it together with coordinated macroeconomics, but it is some kind of another line of theoretical considerations, mostly focused on fast-growing developing countries, starting from Japan historically, South Korea and so on, and also with some applications to modern developing countries, also including China, for instance. Yeah. Main point is that mostly different scholars try to consider Russia from the point of view of one concrete concept. No, for instance, according to Madir and Moldovich, Russia is typical example of mafia state for many, many years and so on and so on. According to some other scholars, it is mostly about state capture in different forms and so on. Some people, like David Lay, for instance, talked about state-led capitalism model with some references to development state and so on. In my view, reality is again more complex, and in 90s, in my view, we can see mostly these two models in Russian reality, some kind of combination of liberal market economy approaches, represented mostly by liberal reformers like Gaidar, Chubais, and many others, which try to implement such kind of approaches in reality, with different outcomes, sometimes successfully, sometimes with deep failure, also with state capture, clearly, yeah. And state capture, it was also a very important part of Russian reality in the 90s, simply because state was extremely weak. And it was really for relevant businesses quite easy to capture the state, yeah, and to use relevant opportunities of government or legislatures, yeah, for their own interests and benefits. Regarding this point, development state and market economies operated in market state. In my view, for instance, I suppose also at least some people here can know these works of Vadim Volkov about violent entrepreneurship with some kind of focus exactly on the activity of mafia in the 90s. Yeah, but in my view, it was not about mafia state. It was private groups operating in liberal market economy. Yeah. And we cannot see these two elements mostly in 90s, simply because a state was too weak. This situation changed, in my view, after 2000, with Putin coming to power. It is a separate story about the reasons for his appointment and election as president and so on and so on. But in any case, we can see some kind of strengthening of state and increasing state capacity after 2000. Yeah, also with increasing tax collection and so on and so on. In my view, if you will talk about second time period from 2000 till 2012, again, these two first elements, including liberal market economy and state capture, were in some sense dominating elements in Russian economic context. But at the same time, we can see already some elements of mafia state and some elements of development state. So for instance, if you will talk about mafia state, this killing of Litvinenko in UK, or case of Magnitsky, in my view, it is exactly the examples of mafia state. Yeah? Regarding development of state, such people like Andrei Klepich or Andrei Belousov were invited to the government already in 2004, 2006. So for instance, Belousov now is the Minister of Defense. Before he was economic aid to Putin during 7 years in the presidential office. Before he was Minister of Economic Development, but he was appointed to a position of Deputy Minister of Economic Development already in 2006. And exactly he initiated these sectoral programs with idea to push some kind of strategic planning and so on. Andrei Klepich was appointed to the position of the director of department at Ministry of Economic Development in 2004. I think in 2008 he was appointed to a position of deputy minister, and they played quite important role in pushing some kind of industrial policies already at this time. Sometimes not successfully, but sometimes with some kind of success. Why all these elements could exist together? Yeah, In my view, first of all, due to huge amount of rent available for Russian state and for the Kremlin in this time period, especially after this increase in oil prices started in 2002, 2003. Yeah. So, due to this huge amount of money available to Putin and to Kremlin, it was possible to support at the same time some elements of liberal market economy, because such people like Grev, Kudrin, Nabiulina, they really tried to create some institutions here and create some kind of proper regulation, improve regulation, so on and so on. At the same time, it was enough money to provide necessary rents using state capture, yeah, for relevant groups, yeah, at federal level, at regional level, and so on and so on. And at the same time, it was again enough money to use some kind of separate channels to support these mafia state elements and even these development state elements. No, in some sense, it was maybe a unique situation, exactly due to this huge amount of money available to KKK people in the Kremlin. Regarding last time period, before the war, the situation changed here, in my view, because on one hand, Putin personally and other people in Kremlin recognized real threats for them personally after 2011, 2012 protests. But in my view, also very important factor was related to Arab Spring, with all the revolutions in Arab countries in 2011, also with personal stories of Mubarak, Gaddafi, and so on. Why it was important? On one hand, exactly starting from 2012, Kremlin started to really repress opposition. It is Bolotnaya and so on. All these criminal cases against Navalny. But at the same time, interesting point, actually, in my view, not really recognized by some scholars. Not only outside Russia, but also inside Russia, was about improvement of bureaucracy. Because basic reasons for this political process of 2011 was related, in my view, not to electoral fraud during these elections of 2011. It was some kind of formal reason, yeah, it was clear. But basic reasons were related to some kind of dissatisfaction of middle class people, especially in large cities, by the quality of state. Because during 2000s, personal incomes of these people really increased quite significantly. And they already could not think about everyday issues, everyday money for them, for their kids. They started to think about future, about education of kids, about healthcare, about environment, and so on. And all these things were really very poor. And it was already under these conditions of huge money available for Kremlin. Yeah. And in my view, all these movements of 2000, protest movements of 2010, 2011, because it was not only 2011, yeah, was driven exactly by these factors. And people in Kremlin were quite smart. No, for instance, with people like Surkov and many other, yeah. And they recognized that it's necessary to do something with these things. And we started to fight corruption. In some sense, following Navalny. But in specific way, because it was not about top-level corruption. With top level, it is the same situation like 10 years ago or 15 years ago now. But if you will talk about low and middle-level corruption, yes, it was really some kind of improvement. And especially after appointment of Kirienko to the position of his deputy head of presidential office, we can see some new people in the position of regional governors, which are not only loyal, because loyalty, of course, is necessary, it's sure, but also which are quite competent. There are some tricky stories because I know for some personal conversations, the story about one regional governors that, according to among his classmates, yeah, from this school of governors, yeah, he called seventh. Why seventh? Because 6 people before them rejected this offer to the position of regional governor. No, and it's understandable because a regional governor is a really risky position because really quite many regional governors were arrested in 2010s and just now are spending time in prison. Yeah, and it is not only Belich, because Belich, okay, he was related to Medvedev, and it was some kind of purchase against Medvedev group, not only in bureaucracy but also in business. So like with Magomedov brothers and so on. But also, it was some ordinary members of United Russia, not affiliated with Medvedev and so on, and they were also arrested. Yeah. At the same time, it is not only risky, but also there are really quite few cases of real promotion of these new regional governors to top-level positions. But nevertheless, some people was agreed to appoint these positions. And for instance, in my time at High School of Economics, we did also a lot of research about public procurement. And we can see at empirical data really some kind of improvement of the situation with corruption in public procurement. Why I'm talking about these things, it is in my view exactly explanation for this decline of state capture element in total composition of Russian economic system. Due to this pressure from Kremlin in terms of improvement of efficiency of bureaucracy. At the same time, if you talk about liberal market economy, yes, maybe it was a bit less strong comparing to previous time period, but nevertheless, such people like Gref or Nabiulin and some other people, even Siluanov, they were in offices and they tried to continue this policy related to proper market regulation, conditions for doing business, and so on and so on. Regarding two last elements, exactly this pressure on bureaucracy, with idea to reduce state capture, on one hand, led to broader space, broader options for such people like Klepach and Belousov. And we can see, especially after 2014, after first sanctions introduced after Donbass, Crimea, and so on, some new development institutions. No, for instance, Industrial Development Fund created in 2014-2015 with idea to support import substitution projects. And in depth interviews with people from Russian business, especially in 2016-2017, we had quite interesting project in Voronezh. I got a really very positive assessment of the activity of these new institutions from ordinary people in business. Yeah, it was the reason for me and my colleagues to pay more attention to the activity of this institution, and we collected. And again, it was interesting because contrary to many other institutions of this type created by government during 2000s or 2010s, like for instance, National Bank and so on. Yeah, this Industrial Development Fund was really very open in terms of provision of information about firms supported by this fund, and we collected information about firms. We collected also, actually, we using some kind of matching approach. Created a control group from all manufacturing firms in the Russian industry from relevant sectors with idea to estimate real effects of this governmental support. And we use not only this time period of support from 2014 to 2017. Actually, we have a longer time period, but we selected exactly these 3 years. But we collected also data for these supported firms and firms from control group till 2020 or 2021. Because the idea of this fund was to provide support for concrete projects. And typically, these projects had some kind of timeline for 3 or 4 years. And therefore, we try to consider the financial indicators for these firms, not in the year of support, but in the year of ending of relevant projects and so on. And actually, we published already this paper just in this year. So, and we can see some statistically significant positive results of this support. Yeah. And it's quite interesting. Again, it is about Putin's Russia. So it is not about South Korea and so on and so on. Regarding mafia state. Now, in my view, a very clear example, and it is exactly why it is much stronger already before the war. It is about Prigozhin and this Wagner private military company. Because in 2014, Kremlin faced some problems with presence of Russian soldiers in Donbass. And it was a solution proposed by people from Ministry of Defense to create such kind of company. It was fully illegal according to Russian legislation. It was done. Afterward, it was used in Syria, in Africa, in Libya, and so on and so on. With a huge amount of money provided to this company using some kind of public funds. And Putin personally told about it during Prigozhin mutiny 1 year ago. So, and in my view, it is clearly about mafia state, because it is already not a private mafia group. It is exactly people at top level of government using such kind of instruments and elements. Okay, maybe last point here is about COVID pandemic. Why it is important? On one hand, especially during 2010s, this decline relevant decline in liberal market economy approaches and so on, also was related to some kind of increasing power of government, especially federal government. And for instance, I could see even such kind of things in my relations with some graduates of higher school of economics, because some of them worked in business, but some of them moved to go to a government. And many of them were quite successful. And it was quite interesting to see that with some kind of improvement of their positions in the government, they started to consider themselves as very important persons. Because in their opinion, they are working with big deals and so on and so on. And all these people in business, they are about commerce, about some kind of money. And we are great people moving the country forward and so on and so on. Of course, simply they had not only power, they had also huge amount of money, because it was also some kind of concentration of resources in the hands of federal government. Why COVID pandemic was important from this point of view? It created much more equal conditions in negotiations between economic cabinet and business, because COVID pandemic really was great shock, totally unexpected, with very negative expectations at initial stage. But it was not only for business. It was also for government with very negative assessment, potential consequences and so on. But economic cabinet in the government faced in actually already first weeks of pandemics a huge pressure from Kremlin in terms of some request for keeping social and political stability. And it was also quite impressive that Kremlin already in first weeks moved all responsibility, political responsibility for relevant regulations and so on, to regional governors. And in my view, it is exactly some kind of contradiction to this point of Nikolai Petrov, that the regional governors are nobody, they are only elements of the system. It is not so easy. Regarding economic cabinet, on one hand, it was really quite powerful people. Yeah, it's true. They had a lot of resources. But the specificity was that they were under strong pressure from Kremlin, and they needed to implement very quickly some policy measures. But they simply didn't have information about reality in different sectors and in different regions. And first of all, they started to ask people from business about this information. And no, actually, we had quite interesting project with my colleagues at HSC in 2020, 2021, with Tatiana Dolgopetova, Yulis Machov, and some other people there. And we even could publish a book based on this project. It was published in January of 2022. So, and if it will be of interest, I'm ready to share it. Yeah. So, unfortunately, it is only in Russian. Yeah, we have only, I suppose, only one article published in English based on this project. But nevertheless, we conducted in 2020, 2021, a series of in-depth interviews with people from firms and also with people, with representatives of sectoral associations from six industries, free from manufacturing and free from services. So and it was quite impressive because they all told about huge demand from the government in first weeks of pandemic about information at relevant firms and so on. And it was not only about supply, it was also about the number of workers sent to administrative vacations. At the same time, officials asked about some problems faced by firms. But they needed not only information, they needed also some ideas what to do. And they asked also people from business about some potential solutions. Of course, for Russian business, it would be much more easy to negotiate relevant things personally. Yeah. Maybe in some restaurant, maybe in some bunny and so on and so on, maybe with some kind of private gifts provided to relevant officials. It was very typical for Russian business in 2000 or 2010. No, in any case, Russian business really is quite opportunistic. Yeah. But the problem was that these government officials simply didn't have time for it, to have personal negotiations with every owner of every top manager of even large companies. And therefore, already in these first weeks of pandemic, quite interesting instruments were created, like closet chats in Telegram, with participation of, it depended on the level of relevant industry. In some case of very important industries, it was with minister, deputy ministers, and owners or CEO of biggest companies. Yeah. In some other cases, it was deputy minister, head of departments, and owners and managers of companies. But nevertheless, it was chats with 30, 40, 50 participants with everyday discussions. And of course, maybe some people from business could think about lobbying their personal interests, but it's really very difficult to do such kind of thing in such space. Therefore, we really started to discuss some general solutions for the sector. Yeah, but it was not very obvious for them. Yeah, but no, we started. Interesting outcome was that government officials not only discussed these ideas, but also they started to implement it. And in some sense, it was really some kind of unexpected result in terms of new mechanisms of private public negotiations. In my view, exactly in the for following some ideas of Daniel Rodrik about new industrial policy. It was quite famous paper of him published, I think, in 2004 or 2005. Yeah. So why it's important in my view? Because it is already from my interviews conducted during the last 2 years. In 2022, exactly in first weeks after introduction of sanctions, the same tools of industrial policy which were elaborated in 2020 due to COVID pandemic with idea to provide some kind of anti-crisis support for the economy, the same tools were implemented, but with a much broader scale. Because in 2020 it was mostly for small firms in services. But in 2022, it was for all economy, including not only small firms, but also medium-sized firms, large firms, and so on and so on. Important point is that, for instance, in 2020, such kind of tools were elaborated during 2 or 3 months, because these officials from economic cabinet really tried to think about potential consequences for them in terms of risks of criminal investigations against them due to corruption and so on. And therefore, we try to create some new mechanisms, more or less resistant to risks of corruption. And it was with involvement of people from commercial banks, including state banks, and so on and so on. And it was done, actually. And therefore, for instance, in 2020, such kind of mechanisms were implemented, in my view, approximately in June. And first restrictions were introduced already in March 2020. So it was about 3 months. And it was some difference, for instance, to Germany, because in Germany, such kind of support measures were introduced already in 2 or 3 weeks. Yeah. But because this relatively successful experience of 2020, such kind of mechanisms could be introduced again very quickly in 2022. Okay. So now about the war. No important element, in my view, of all these models and interactions of 2 previous decades was that on one hand, we could talk about some kind of balance between business and government and so on. But exactly due to this key element about non-participation of business in any political activity not approved directly by the Kremlin, finally, we came to quite strange situation with actually quite developed market economy, but with a totally non-competitive political system. Because finally, and it's a bit strange combination, yeah, because finally, already in 2014, not only 2022, yeah, really one person like Putin could make some kind of crucial decisions, yeah. For instance, about Crimea annexation, yeah. It was made by him without any real consultations with people from economic cabinet. So it was already the reality of 2010s, yeah, not only for 2022. And exactly due to this reason, in my view, Kremlin is some kind of separate important actor, which is not associated with security cabinet, economic cabinet, and so on and so on, with some kind of specific incentives. Yeah. And it was exactly about the war. Of course, maybe it's some kind of separate story about huge mistakes, in my view, made by Putin personally and some people from FSB with assessment of situation in Ukraine. But in real terms, both bureaucracy at all levels, if you talk about civil bureaucracy, and also business. And it is about all business, about oligarchs, about international companies, of course, and also about over private business. We are not ready to the war, and we are not interested in the war. Yeah, and therefore it was really this decision really has broken this balance created before. Yeah. Nevertheless, we could see some interesting and in some sense unexpected consequences, because on one hand, I told already that many experts, not only outside Russia but also inside Russia, expected really some kind of collapse of Russian economy, maybe not in weeks but in some months after the introduction of international sanctions. The problem is that again, the real picture is much more complicated, and no, especially because Tim worked a lot in Russia in that, yeah. I suppose maybe he could provide some comments from his perspective, yeah. I could see some similarity, yeah, with the situation of 90s. Because, for instance, this exit of large international companies from Russia provided new huge sources of rent in terms of redistribution of assets of these companies. And it was in some sense beneficial for Kremlin, because Kremlin during the last 2 years could provide quite significant compensations for Russian business. Again, many people from Russian business lost a lot. But at the same time, some opportunities to provide compensations were quite high. It is not only about this exit of not only about these assets of foreign firms. And in my view, it is comparable in some sense to privatization of 90s. There can be also maybe some kind of similarity to the situation of 98 crisis, because after devaluation, huge devaluation of ruble in 98, it was 4-time devaluation. The share of imported goods in the Russian market declined dramatically, yeah, simply because it was much higher prices. Now it was not about prices, it was simply about private sanctions, with many companies left Russian market. But in terms of effects, it was the same. It was again some kind of opportunities for Russian firms to go to these new niches. of course, this higher quality of government, limited, no, and again, very important point is about spending all these reserves accumulated during previous 20 years due to activity of such people like Kudrin, Silanov, and so on and so on. A combination of all these factors provided really quite important incentives for Russian business. Of course, maybe there is also some kind of another part of the story because as I know personally, many people from Russian business would be happier to leave Russia. But due to personal sanctions, started also in 2022 with these huge lists with many hundreds and even thousands of people, they simply left this opportunity. No, I suppose all know the story of Friedman, yeah, and other, yeah. But it is not unique. Nevertheless, now again, as I told already, this higher quality of government really limited money saving. With this always process of new industrial policy, with huge money used to support the economy. Regarding this point, it is again some kind of unexpected consequence of current economic policy, because of course Kremlin didn't think about real improvement of living standards of ordinary Russians. Kremlin was also not prepared to real war, and therefore defense industry didn't have enough capacity to provide necessary supply for the army, again, on conditions of real war. Therefore, Kremlin, especially from the autumn of 2022, started to spend a huge amount of money for different kind of orders for defense industry. And these plants in defense industry started to work for 16 or 20 hours per day and so on. But they needed additional people because nobody, of course, they could ask some workers to work not 8 hours per day, but maybe 10 or 12. But nobody is ready and can work 16 hours or 20 hours per day. Yeah. Therefore, we started to hire new workers. But it's interesting because, again, in some kind of framework of this informal contract between business and Kremlin during previous 20 years, starting from late 2000s, according to our surveys, Russian business complained about a shortage of labor force. And we had even some kind of discussions with Vladimir Gepelson about real reasons for such kind of shortage and so on. But for instance, according to Gepelson, main reason was that it was huge number of inefficient firms in the Russian industry, which simply didn't have enough money to pay normal wages, normal salaries to high qualified workers. And therefore, all these stories about labor force shortage, it's artificial. Yeah. In my view, it was not so. But in reality, really, before 2022, Russian firms tried not to compete for workers by increasing salaries. No, simply because it was the way to decline their profits. And government in some sense supported them in such kind of approach. Now, defense industry really violated this informal agreement between the Russian firms not to increase salaries, simply because this defense industry didn't have choice. They had these huge government orders. We didn't have workers. Yeah. And they started to offer salaries twice higher or 3 times higher and so on. And it led to quite serious competition between different firms in the same regions. So for instance, I know from a personal interview in one region in north west, yeah, part of Russia, yeah, European part. It was owner and manager of one logistics center, and he complained that in 2023 it was necessary for him to increase salaries for his workers at his logistics center to the level of 70, 80,000 rubles per month. And before, in this region, 30 rubles per month, it was good salary, and he paid about 40 or 50. And of course, for him, it was not very beneficial, yeah. But he didn't have other choice because in this region, it was a lot of military plants. And if he would not increase salaries for his workers, they simply will move to this military plants, and he will stop his business because he would not find other workers. Why it was important? Because if we will talk about only about this money provided for defense industry, it is not so big a sector of Russian economy. Before the war, as I remember, it was about 1.2 millions of workers for this in this industry, and for better understanding, it was about 72 millions of workers in Russian economy. Yeah. So it is not huge, yeah, about 2%. But they provided some kind of competitive pressure on other firms, and therefore we can see the increase in salaries not only in defense industry, but also in many other sectors. And therefore, for instance, especially in 2023, 2024, not only this budget money, this budget impulse was important in terms of pushing the economy, but also this growing demand on the side of private sector due to these higher salaries in civil industries. Okay. No, regarding current situation, yeah. Again, on one hand, it was, I think, 3.5 growth of GDP in 2023. For this year, it is about the same numbers. Regarding average personal incomes, I think it was 8% increase in the real incomes in 2023. And projections for this year is about 10 or 11%. So it's a really huge increase. Yeah. And any normal economy would be happy with such kind of results. But the reality of Russian economy, again, is much more mixed. Because on one hand, there is a really huge shortage of labor force. No, simply because hundred thousands of people were drafted or contracted to the army in 2022, 2023. And also these payments to all these men contracted to the army provided also quite significant pressure on labor market. It is clear. Yeah. It was also two waves of immigration. First one in the spring of 2022, second one after this partial mobilization in September 2022. Oral estimations is about 1 million or maybe a bit less, but nevertheless, even 1 million people left Russia. It's quite big number. Yeah. Additionally, all these hundreds of thousands contracted to them. As a result, all this growing demand led to some kind of structural distortions in the economy because formally, yes, we can see these higher numbers of GDP, but it's necessary to understand that mostly it is about growing production of defense industry or related industries. No, because, for instance, if we are talking about food industry or light industry or pharmaceuticals, they also are working in significant sense for the army. But it means that workers from these industries and also workers from all other sectors, which started to get much higher salaries, they are going to the market. But economy don't have capacity to produce real goods for all these people. As a result, for instance, in 2023 already, starting from the spring, we could see growing import. No, it was quite simple solution to import some consumer goods from Turkey, from China, and so on and so on. And for instance, with all international sanctions, the amount of import in 2023 was comparable, or maybe even higher compared to 2021. Yeah, but it led to devaluation of ruble. It was about, I think, 65 or 70 rubles per dollar in the spring of 2023, and it was already about 100 ruble per dollar in the October of 2023. with some kind of risk of inflation. As a result, central bank, led by the Bulan, started to increase K rate. It was only 7.5% in July 2023, and now it is 21%. Yeah. So it is not about stable economy, to be sure. Yeah. Concerning this point, on one hand, I told myself about quite competent people in the economic cabinet which try to manage all these problems starting from 2000s with all these crises actually created in many cases by Kremlin itself, yeah, like this crisis of 2014, 2015, yeah. But now, exactly due to this weakening of positions of these people in the government or people from economic cabinet in bargaining with security cabinet, they really cannot control military expenses. Although here I provided some numbers, but maybe a more important point is that, for instance, in 2023, actually 1 year ago, Silonov told that next year, 2024, will be the K year for this war, and therefore we should allocate necessary resources. It will be significant increase in spending, 70%. Yeah, but after that, Ministry of Finance expected quite significant decline of these expenses. For instance, for this year, it was allocated, 10.8 trillion of ruble for military expenses, and for next year it should be only 1 year ago, 8.5 trillion rubles. And after that, for 2026, it was 7.7 or something like that. Yeah. Actually, according to my conversations with relevant experts, yeah, monitoring this field, for 10 months of this year, military expenses were already 12 trillion rubles. Simply because, for instance, only this first installment for men's contracted to the army during this year, yeah, they increased at regional level 3-4 times. Russia started to buy all this equipment and so on and so on from North Korea. Russia invited these North Korean soldiers to Kursk Oblast and so on. And of course, it is for money. It is not free. Yeah, and all this money were not allocated in the budget. And again, we are not at the year. It will be some additional money. Yeah. And for next year, it is again some kind of increase. For instance, again, I told that it was the plan of Ministry of Finance to have for next year for 8.5 trillion rubles of military expenses. Now, according to current budget, it is 13.5 trillion rubles. So 50 billions dollar more. And there is no any decline of these expenses for next years, for 2026, 2027. In my view, it is some kind of indicator of a real trap faced by Kremlin now, because during 2 years before, they had enough money to continue the war, to cover all social obligations, and to provide some kind of support for economy, and even provide some kind of rents for relevant groups. Yeah. Now it's not so. Maybe one more element. In my view, it is really first time during the whole rule of Putin, in this current budget, approved already by State Duma, first time we can see a decline of money allocated to social policy in nominal terms. Because in 2024 it was 7.7 trillion rubles, and it is only 6.9 trillion rubles for next year. No, and maybe last point about technological development. On one hand, yes, in terms of some kind of supply of components and so on, yeah, Kremlin could manage more or less this problem during the last 2 years, using some kind of supply from China, from Turkey, and so on, especially for defense industry. But if you talk about long-term solutions, as I know, there are really quite significant problems for manufacturing. Yeah, but some kind of example from everyday life. I think in September of this year, State Duma announced a special discussion about extension of time of operation for 140,000 of elevators in apartment buildings, simply because there is no money. Such kind of equipment became much more expensive. And again, according to technical standards, these elevators can operate about 25 years. And they will simply extend operation of these elevators. Clearly with some risks for people, but we don't have money. And again, there is no capacity in Russian economy to produce such kind of equipment. Okay, maybe I think I'm talking already too long, yeah? No?
Well, maybe, yes. Okay.
Okay, so no, there is some kind of discussion of different additional factors, yeah? No, maybe I will not talk about second part. No, maybe only about this one. I will provide some kind of comment about first part. In 2022, we had a big survey of Russian manufacturing firms. Actually, we conducted such surveys starting from 2005. And first survey was conducted with World Bank. In 2009, we had another survey ordered by Ministry of Economic Development, led by, I suppose, Bulan at this time, already in there. Yeah. And after that, in 2014, 2018, we conducted such surveys with financial support from basic research program of High School of Economics. So, and the idea of such surveys, usually we covered about 2,000 firms with quite extensive questionnaire. And the idea was exactly to understand some key problems of Russian firms, some solutions realized by their everyday lives and so on. So, no, and we published a lot of quite good papers based on this service, also in this journal edited by a team, Post-Work Affairs. So in 2022, we planned such kind of survey. Of course, we started to do it, to think about it in 2021. And we got some money from HSE, of course, without any expectations for the war. And just before leaving from Moscow in March of 2022, I asked my senior colleagues what we should do with this money. The response was, up to you. You can use it, you cannot use it. So, no, for better understanding, it was really in some sense risky to start such kind of survey because the situation was extremely uncertain. Nevertheless, we tried, yeah, and we started with some in-depth interviews conducted in March and April 2022, and survey was conducted in July, November 2022. We were really lucky because we could collect about 1,800 questionnaires. Yeah, and interesting point that partial mobilization was exactly in the middle of this survey. And in some sense, it is similar to our survey conducted with team in 2011, because it was also during this political process of 2011. So, and in this survey, we had specific questions about risks of predatory actions on the side of government in assessments of firms. Not just now, but for next 2 or 3 years. We asked such questions before in 2018 and 2014 because we had some kind of research institute. My initial expectations was about increasing risk. Again, it is clearly much higher level of uncertainty, and therefore I expected some kind of higher assessment of these risks. Some kind of surprise was that these assessments of firms declined. Assessments of these predatory actions of government officials declined after mobilization. No, actually, we are still working with this data. Yeah, we don't have real papers at the moment. Yeah, but I tried to find some explanations for these results, and it was the following. In first 1 week or maybe 10 days, it was real house. Because again, all these branches of Ministry of Defense in the regions were not prepared to mobilization. And therefore, we tried to capture any men in the streets and so on, in the training centers. No, it was in the news. The problem for firms was that in many cases, really case specialists of these enterprises were captured for the army. And it led to huge problems for firms. Very few firms, especially large firms, started some negotiations with regional authorities with idea that in exchange for non-drafting these case specialists, these firms provided some kind of help to regional authorities with idea to comply with all these quotas set to regional authorities by Kremlin. And we used even their HR departments to find necessary men and even to provide them with some kind of equipment. Again, it was a new element of this informal contract at regional level, mostly not at federal level, but some kind of explanation of these our results for me was that these people in relevant enterprises are providing this help to regional authorities in exchange expected that government, especially at regional level, will stop such kind of predatory activity against them. No, again, we are still working with this data. Yeah? And we had also some interesting results that this effect was more impressive, more stronger, exactly with regions with a higher intensity of mobilizations. No, and here we used already some data not from survey because we didn't have such data surveys. We used some other data. Okay, last point here. In my view, no, maybe it is about some changes, especially during last year, due to these real constraints faced by Kremlin. They started to move to some new model, and it is about mobilization economy. And actually, it is not unique for the country leading real war. Yeah, they were not ready to accept and to recognize it publicly. Yeah, and especially, for instance, this use of terms of special operation is quite rational because they try to create some kind of illusion, but it is not the war; it is only special operation. And you can continue your normal life, your normal business. You can go to different kind of tourist trips in the country to enjoy your life and so on and so on. But such kind of approach is ending now simply because we don't have money already for it. But we try to create some kind of ideological foundation for it. And again, such kind of ideas of mobilization economy is also not unique. For instance, these people from the sports club are talking about such kind of approach from 2013, 2014. And again, they were extremely marginal 10 years ago. They became already, in my view, even before the war, some kind of representative of mainstream. Yeah. But, and again, quite many people from security cabinet, like Bastrikin, yeah, told about such kind of things already for years, about nationalization of industries and so on and so on. But new interesting point is that some people from economic cabinet started to talk about such things. And here I provided some example of Chikunkov. Chikunkov is a minister for Far East development. And he is minister actually for 4 years. He was appointed not in this year. He's relatively young, I think 44, 42 or 43. He was investment banker before appointment to the government. And he published in the June of this year at RBK comment, his personal comment, with ideas that all these private business models, perhaps they can be acceptable and okay for US, but it's not for Russia. For Russia, we need not entrepreneurs, but creators. He provided even some kind of title for this new model using this term patriotic socialism. Again, in my view, it's crazy. Yeah, and I don't believe that this person is thinking really so. Yeah, but it can be positive for his career. And again, it's not so important what such people are thinking in real terms. They are talking, we think, publicly. And unfortunately, under current conditions, our people, which are thinking in our way, are not ready to argue. So, okay, it is some kind of final composition, yeah. Again, on left side, you can see K groups, yeah, Kremlin, Security Cabinet, Economic Cabinet, and so on and so on. And their preferences, yeah. No, for instance, if you will talk about, for instance, international business, yeah, they are from different countries. And in my view, for instance, some German business would prefer this coordinated market economy models, yeah. Some people from UK or US, of course, would prefer liberal market economy model. Yeah, and actually, they really were quite influential in Russia, especially before 2011, 2012. Yeah, with this Foreign Investment Advisory Council and so on. Yeah, with meetings every year with prime minister, with some kind of relevant decisions made by the government. But now the influence of these international businesses is really close to zero. Yeah, unfortunately. Regarding other businesses in Russia, no, you can see maybe some stronger preferences for coordinated market economies, yeah. But again, the opportunities of this business, no, represented, for instance, by Delovaya Россия or Apora or even SBP. No, SBP closer to oligarchs, but nevertheless, also declining. What we can see that increased only bargaining power of Kremlin and Security Cabinet. And in all other cases, it is declined and so on. Oh, maybe large state-owned corporations, yeah, like Rostec, yeah. Yes, they had, yeah. So, again, overall point is that most of actors actually would not prefer mobilization economy option, but they have, unfortunately, a much lower bargaining power now. So,
Maybe we'll take some questions.
yeah. Okay. Well, maybe I can show this slide only. It is about future. Yeah. Okay.
Everyone can read. Any questions, anybody? Aliona, you want to start us off?
Yeah, thank you so much. I have a lot of questions, but I'll take the most provocative one. What you described in my picture, in my head, I'm picturing how the Russian economy is basically a dog that is biting itself in its tail. And it seems to me that, or could you comment on whether it's lucrative for the Kremlin in terms of the economy to continue the invasion, because whatever comes after will be so destabilizing and so much more challenging than the situation right now.
No, I would say that Russian business, in my view, and Russian economy, try to respond on different kind of actions of Kremlin, provided real damage for the economy during the last 15 years. It is not unique for 2022, because in 2022 it was maybe much stronger shock. But the specificity of the situation during previous 15 years was in the presence of some tools in the hands of Kremlin to provide some compensations for business. And at the same time, it was really risky for business to make anything against the Kremlin. So, for instance, the very relevant example of Sergei Petrov, head of this Rolls company, and he was really one of few Russian entrepreneurs which tried to support opposition during 2010s. Yeah. He should emigrate, I think, already 2018 or 2019, just before COVID, not just before the war. Yeah, and he left here his company in last year. Yeah, and his company was moved finally after nationalization to the hands of this Umar Krivlov, personally associated with head of security guard of Putin. Yeah. Oh, again. It was another situation of 90s with some collective action of Russian business, for instance, during these 96 elections. Yeah. After that, it was, in my view, some kind of turning point in 2003 with Yugoslavia, because in this time, it was, in my view, some option for Russian business to defend common interests, yeah, collective interests. but they had some internal problems and they were not ready to do it. And after that, this again, very opportunistic strategy to do business as usual is the dominating. But the problem is that if it will be really some kind of transition to something similar to North Korea model, it will be simply no place for all these people in this model. I'm not sure that these people from Russian business are recognizing it now. It is a separate question. But maybe now the time for them to start to think. Yeah.
You mentioned several times some very interesting things about the Russian labor force. In that the early years of post-Soviet Russia, labor force was inexpensive, wages were low, and that over time that changed and continues to change. Obviously, that's creating a lot of inflationary pressures that we've started to see recently in the Russian economy. And I guess my question is this. Is the Russian economy entering a new phase of hyperinflation or persistent inflation? And how will the Russian policymakers deal with that? It sounds to me, based on what you also alluded to earlier, that in budgetary negotiations or manifestations, there is the notion that there's not enough money for this or for that. So that seems to me that the Russian central bank is not pursuing an inflationary policy of flooding the economy with new rubles. How do you see that all playing out?
Good question. In my view, it is in reality the question about economic model, because all this story about higher inflation, hyperinflation, and so on, it is about a real market economy, yeah, and some kind of response of economy under market conditions on some kind of strange policy of the government and so on. But for instance, if we will talk about the economic model of North Korea, there are no questions about inflation. If we will remember, yeah, the story about Soviet Union, yeah, it was a huge number of different problems, but it was not about inflation. Yeah, and in my view, it is exactly now the question about the model. A central bank try to continue some policy which is relevant more or less for market economy. They try to find some kind of specific solutions, yeah, which can provide some response or these really very strange, yeah, decisions made by Kremlin. But it can be totally our solution with some kind of transition to another model. And in my view, there are quite influential groups in Russian economy just now, which would prefer such approach.
So it would be lots of repression and so that there would be no political effects from inflation
for instance,
and lots of.
I'm sorry, for better understanding. In late 30s, Germany, in some sense, was in similar situation because it was also huge shortage of labor force, exactly due to huge money provided by the government to the economy, with some economic growth, not only in military industry but also in infrastructure and so on and so on. But already at the end of 30s, German government, not Nazi government, yeah, introduced some specific regulation of prices, regulation of salaries, and so on and so on, and also regulation of rates of credits and so on. And in my view, it can be some solution for Russia now. Again, we all know about the end of Germany after that, yeah, in 1945, yeah. I don't know about the situation with Russia now, but it can be so.
Or not.
Yes, so I had two questions. My first question is about, so there was all this literature and I mean this narrative about the legal vulnerability of economic elites, and so we have the Poniatowski case. But at the same time, what you are showing is that, you know, in the 2000s, the business had all these opportunities for growth. And I saw that on the last slide that you were mentioning the role case on the previous slide. The nationalization. And I was wondering, where do you position yourself here? Because first of all, how can we distinguish between, let's say, politicized prosecutions of economic elites on, let's say, fabricated charges, and the more like legitimate fight against corruption, in the sense that, there are some people in the government who are, you know, who did actually do something, so they are prosecuted for some like real embezzlement. So where do you draw the line here? And what can we do of this now with the role case, the nationalization, and where does it go now? Like, are we talking about like politicized prosecution? Still, you know, the fight against corruption pursued by the state. And my second question is about international business, because not all international business pulled out from Russia. There is still like an important presence of international business, and how does it factor in your like larger argument? Thank you.
Regarding first part of your question, in my view, this it's actually quite old concept proposed by Schleifer and Vishny about different types of corruption. Yeah, it can be useful here. It is especially about decentralized corruption and centralized corruption. Decentralized corruption and centralized corruption. Yeah, it is really a very famous paper published in 2000.
All my students read it. Yes.
1993. Yeah. So, in my view, at least some years ago, it was the most cited paper in economics. Yeah, it was published in Quarterly Journal of Economics. But the point is that there are not any complicated models in this paper. It is really very simple. Yeah. And maybe it is exactly very useful for citations. Exactly. Yeah. But the point is that centralized corruption, it is of course bad. Yeah, finally, with some kind of costs for the society and so on and so on. But it is much more efficient comparing to decentralized corruption. And in my view, in 2010s, we can see exactly this transition from decentralized corruption, which was typical for 2000s, to centralized one. And for instance, if we will talk exactly about this pressure business, in 2000s, we can see huge number of cases at regional level, with some kind of capture of assets of middle-sized businesses and so on and so on, initiated by regional prosecutors, regional investigators, and so on and so on. Exactly in framework with these attempts to improve investment climate in business, Russian government, exactly Kremlin, created some special system, and we directly studied it in framework of this International Center for Studies of Institutional Development, with a position of ombudsman for entrepreneur rights and so on. No, it was Titov, yeah. And the idea was that it's possible to apply to this person with some kind of complaints about activity of regional prosecutors, regional policemen, and so on and so on. And of course, it was not proper solution, but in some sense it helped. But at the same time, if it was some kind of top-level decision. For instance, in the case of not only in the case of Rolf, it was also in the case of Mark and some other. Yeah? If some people in Kremlin, maybe not personally Putin, but some close to him, made some decisions. Of course, it was all, totally about our story. Yeah? But nevertheless, in my view, this scale of predation at regional and local level really decreased, because it became costly for relevant prosecutors, relevant investigators, and so on and so on. No, and we know also a huge number of cases, criminal cases, not only against regional governors or federal ministers like Bulukayev and so on, or some other people, but also about this top-level people, generals from Moscow Prosecution Office, also some generals from Ministry of Internal Affairs, also even against some colonels from FSB. Of course, it was about colonels, not generals, yeah, but nevertheless, yeah. So, and in my view, it is exactly about these higher risks for such people. And therefore, they try to be more careful. So, and it was second part of your question.
Maybe you can also say something about the Rolls case.
The fraud case, in my view, maybe it is more general story because, for instance, the case of Magomedov brothers, yeah, they were arrested, I think, in 2018, yeah, and for better understanding, they were billionaires, but they became really visible exactly in time of Medvedev, and one of them studied together with Dvorkovich. And it was a lot of some kind of anecdotes about some kind of personal connections and so on and so on. And in my view, their arrests was a really element of some kind of projects against people which tried to cooperate and collaborate with Medvedev. Because it was case against Vekselberg, against Yevtushenkov, against Belich, and so on. Yeah. It was, in my view, some kind of political story. But why I mentioned this case now? Magomedov brothers lost the control on their key assets, Fesco company, only in 2022 or maybe 2023. Yeah. So during they were already 4 years in prison. But they tried to use different kind of legal options with some kind of appeal to one court, another court, and so on and so on. And they tried to fight. Yeah. And exactly, it was the strategy of many Russian entrepreneurs. And exactly due to these reasons, for instance, this position of Titov was quite important because in the case of some kind of predatory behavior at the level of regional courts, it was possible to apply to higher courts and at the same time to inform Titov. Just now, situation changed, dramatically changed in 2023. Actually, not with Rolls case, but actually with these first cases from chemical industry, initiated actually by Rothenberg brothers. Because they started to use General Prosecutor Office for capture of relevant companies, or actually for nationalization initially, yeah, with totally another arguments. It was not about fraud or some kind of economic crime and so on and so on. It was about violation of national interest of Russian Federation, economic sovereignty of Russian Federation, and so on. And if before courts could consider such kind of cases during the years, and at least some judges tried to be fair, yeah. Under such arguments provided by FSB, nobody was ready to say anything. And therefore, for instance, these cases from the chemical industry in summer of 2023 were really executed in 2 or 3 weeks after first request sent by General Prosecutor Office. Yeah. And it was the same story with Rolf, Mark and so on. And it changed balance because all these legal options available before became totally inefficient now. You also asked about international business, yeah?
Yes, but I mean, we can also open to.
No, okay.
Alice.
I'm sorry.
Thank you for all this wonderful information. Can I ask about power and about renegotiating of informal contracts with authorities? Could you go back to the slide where you listed, I think it was the one before this, where you had the, it was the one with the different actors, regional authorities.
No, it was one or maybe.
It was toward the end. It was this, yeah,
Yeah,
this one.
okay. Yeah.
So I just, it seems to me that, I'm interested in power. Like, is there a new shift in power toward those regions that are providing the most men and have factories or industry that is providing for the military? It seems to me that in the new economy, these would be the most powerful regions, and there might be an interest for the governors in those regions to get together with the leaders of the factories in those regions and, you know, make some demands on the center. Or after a while, start to say, you know, so you described this new informal contract in which, you know, the firm's specialists are not drafted to the army, and then the firm provides something to regional authorities. But that suggests there is no agreement or collusion among regional authorities and firms. And it just, is anyone working on kind of like which regions or which actors are getting together or are kind of using this moment to seize political power, possibly, for themselves or against the center or against other actors?
It's a good question. I suppose we can see, really some differences, but no, for instance, as one example, Shumkov, he is governor of Kurgan region, and it was for really decades extremely poor region, and actually I know him personally. He worked before as deputy vice governor in Yekaterinburg. No, not in Yekaterinburg, in Tyumen also. No, in any case, it was in Tyumen, and in my view, he represented exactly this group of some kind of dirigist bureaucrats, like statist, Klepach below, so but he's much younger. For him, it was really promotion, but he was promoted to extremely poor region, and it was done before the war. But this region historically had huge military industry. And in my view, yes, he benefited, maybe personally also, from recent development. But at the same time, I would not overestimate the influence of such kind of people now, because actually they can be really quite simply replaced, and we can see it even just now. And maybe if situation will worsen, and again, depending on the policy of Kremlin. For instance, if we will see something similar to 90s, yes, such kind of governors can be more influential in political terms. But in my view, it is the question of some kind of next future. Because yes, first of all, there is a really new generation of regional governors. Because practically all old people, like Savchenko, for instance, Belgorod, or it came our way. It was Tulev, we were replaced already. And now even some people which were appointed by Putin himself in 2000s or even by Medvedev in his rule, already they are replaced. Now mostly it is people came under Kirienko, and they are really much more younger on one hand, and actually much more competent, and maybe having some kind of ambitions. But overall conditions for them are quite restrictive. And actually, current situation, in my view, nevertheless, led to some kind of decline of their opportunities. But again, you are right that there are some differences. And for instance, some more militarized regions can maybe broader opportunities, maybe.
So I will ask very kind of naive question because I'm not really very knowledgeable.
This is the question you have to be very careful, very worried about. Whenever anybody says, I have a very naive question, it's always the hardest one. So sorry.
So I read some like article, like with the Russian and Ukraine war and with all the sanctions, EU still import a lot of the gas or oil from Russia. It's kind of still funding the war. So even I guess with the win of Donald Trump in the US president, so you're, I guess, from the front line, what do you think will bring this war to end, to a negotiation table? Because if the EU still fund the war, so in a sense, even though you describe all the whatever difficulty about the economy, because I checked, the inflation is high, the equity index did drop, but then the Russian ruble did not really depreciate that much, right, from the pre-war. And then you mentioned all these new opportunities. So is it in the best interest for Putin just to go to the negotiation table just to stop the war? Or I mean, like, like she's saying, is it like almost like in the US, whatever, the military complex is kind of in their best interest to continue
Mhm.
this war, especially Trump is kind of a little bit, how to say, like a friend. I mean, the article saying he's friend with Putin, so.
No, in my view, your question is related exactly to this last slide, last slide of my presentation. And maybe I will provide some kind of like a comment here, because maybe it's not enough clear from this slide. First point, regarding economic relations between Russia and Europe. No, first of all, it was, in my view, some strategy of Europe, and first of all, strategy of Germany, to manage potential problems with Russia using this economic interdependence. Interdependence, yeah. And it was this policy of Merkel, but not only Merkel, it was also policy of previous German governments, yeah. And they supposed that it is beneficial relations, and it should be crazy to break all these things, yeah. Exactly from this point of view, Europe, and especially Germany, was not prepared to the war, because they really didn't expect it, yeah. And they considered it as fully irrational. Exactly due to this situation, we can see quite strange design of sanctions, because the most sensitive sanctions related exactly to Russian energy export were introduced only in December of 2022. And for instance, exactly due to this reason, in 2022, Kremlin had not less money, but much more money comparing to 2021. No, for instance, Russian export in 2022 was revenue, yeah, was $100 billion higher compared to 2021. Exactly because, for instance, financial sanctions and personal sanctions were introduced in February, March of 2022, but real economic sanctions related to Russian energy export were introduced only in December of 2022. Yeah. Interesting point is that, especially Oleg Itshoki in last week mentioned it at seminar at Fletcher School. Yeah, it was some kind of surprise not only on the Russian side, it was also some kind of surprise on the European side, because European economy, it was really very dependent on Russian energy export, but it could adapt to this new situation, because actually Russia stopped this export at the same time. No, especially if you talk about Gazprom, yeah, it was not about oil. Oil is separate story, yeah. And again, in my view, it is quite interesting result of a really extremely high flexibility of market economy. And it is both about Russia and about Europe. Yeah. But regarding Europe, no, in some sense, European politicians really didn't have big choice, because such sanctions were really costly for Europe. It's true, yeah. But more generally, the problem is, in my view, on Western side, in maybe too high expectations related to sanctions, because many experts, especially here in the US, really thought, especially in 2022, that all the sanctions will provide very strong effect. And therefore, it's not so important to think about the efficiency of these sanctions and so on. It's better to implement them all together with some kind of collapse of Russian economy as a result. Yeah. The problem is that in reality, and we thought mostly about a short-term effect. And we didn't thought, in my view, about long-term effect. The problem is that in long term, different sanctions or one sanctions can contradict to another one. So for instance, if we will talk about financial sanctions, yeah, in reality, they blocked financial resources in Russia, because for Russian business, very typical strategy in terms of, in case of uncertainty, was to move some money to different kind of offshore accounts abroad and so on and so on.
Yeah.
But now it became much more difficult, especially for large business. Again, middle-sized businesses try to use different schemes, but large companies, they are much more visible, and as a result of these financial sanctions. Again, with sanctions, the idea of the sanctions was to collapse Russian financial system. And again, this really high professional level of people from Russian Central Bank could help to Kremlin. And this goal was not realized, but short-term goal. But in long term, we can see totally opposite effect with additional money provided to the regime. Because again, many people from Russian business would be happy to move money abroad, but they cannot do it. So, and again, if we will talk about the end of war, unfortunately, it's necessary to recognize now that only sanctions and even only very strong support, military support to Ukraine is not enough.
Yeah.
No, because Russian economy, yes, it is quite big economy, finally. It is not so big compared to US or to Europe, but it is not small. Yeah. And again, it's also necessary to understand that, for instance, contrary to the sanction regime against Iran or against South Africa 30 years ago, there is some kind of split between West and global South. And no, it is maybe very simple comparison, but we have room with two doors. And one door was fully blocked, but another door is fully open. And of course, it's a bit costly to relocate all these flows to another door, but it was done. It was done already in 2022. And for instance, according to my conversations with people from Russian business, in 2022, sanctions, yes, it was the topic, for some kind of discussions and so on and so on. Starting from 2023, it is already not the topic. And all these additional sanctions, actually, in my view, played only very marginal role. Only some attempts of US, especially in this year, to provide some threats of secondary sanctions for Chinese banks, provided some kind of impacts, in terms of a much longer supply and much longer delivery of some goods from China. But again, it is not crucial. It can be managed. But in military terms, it's necessary to understand that in the case of real constraints, even financial constraints, it's clear that Kremlin will provide necessary resources to army. And therefore, even from this point of view, this sanction pressure is not enough. And even in the case of much bigger military support to Ukraine, it's necessary to understand that, unfortunately, on the Ukrainian side, it's simply not enough people. And on the Russian side, actually, Putin didn't use this mobilization, and it is the option. Of course, it can be dangerous for himself, and for better understanding, he didn't use in front line all these people from National Guard, because I suppose these people in Kremlin recognize it that all these
better to keep them close.
Exactly, all these people with military experience, can be dangerous for regime. And it's better not to provide opportunities for such, especially for instance, if these people are going on their own decision to the front line, and are paying with money, it's one story. But if they are drafted, it's another story. So, but my point is that it's possible to finish this war, to end this war, only with some political changes inside the Russia. And my point is that unfortunately, Putin, in real terms, is not interested in the end of this war.
He's not interested.
No, of course, no, because with the end of this war, he will face a huge number of internal problems, and even more. The start of this war, in my view, it was some kind of attempt to use some external war as some kind of temporary solutions for internal problems. And in some sense, it is similar to the situation of 2014, because after 2011, 2012, personal ratings of Putin started to decline. Yes, he could manage these presidential elections in 2012 with some results, but it was growing tensions in the society with some kind of dissatisfaction and so on. And he used actually crime annexation, first of all, as some kind of tool for patriotic mobilization of people. And it was really enough for 4 or 5 years after that for keeping social stability. And in my view, they thought exactly about such kind of approach in 2022, because before, especially after 2018, yeah, after this pension reform, we can see a huge number of protests already, not only in Moscow and St. Petersburg, but also in Arkhangelsk, in Yekaterinburg, in Bashkiria, in Khabarovsk, and so on. Yeah, and they didn't thought about the war. They really did. They really thought about a special military operation like Crimea and Donbass. Yeah, but they started real war, and at the same time, they cannot provide promised results. So, and my point is that I would not expect a real end of this war with Putin. But if it's so, it's necessary to think about replacement of Putin. But it can be done, in my view, only by domestic actors. But it's necessary to provide maybe some kind of incentives for these actors. And actually, it's exactly about these points at these lines, because on one hand, there are some real constraints in terms of really very high personal risks for these people from Russian business, for Russian bureaucracy, and so on. Yeah, and therefore we can see some kind of immigration of top-level artists after 2022, but it was practically no cases from business, and practically no cases from top-level bureaucracy, because for these people it's really personally very dangerous. It's true. And for instance, in 2022 and 2023, we know dozens of cases of some strange deaths of top-level managers from different Russian companies, not only in Russia, but also in many other countries. Yeah. But there is another side of the story, because for any actions, collective actions against Kremlin and against Putin, it's necessary to understand what these people taking these risks could get in exchange. And it is, in my view, one problem on the side of Russian opposition, because there is no real positive alternative provided for these people with some kind of understanding of their place in the future model of economic life, political life in Russia, and so on. Yeah? But the problem is that, unfortunately, there is also no real exit strategies for these people from Russian elite provided by the West. For instance, about personal sanctions, it is pressure, but there is no exit strategies. Look, for instance, we know all this case of Walsh from Yandex, but it's really only one case. In my view, totally not transparent. And there is no, again, I know some people from Russian business which are under sanctions and which would be happy to exit sanctions, but they don't know how to do it. And in my view, it is exactly the problem on Western side. Because if you have only pressure, it's a bit difficult to expect some kind of positive response. And even more, we can see even some kind of consolidation on the Russian side, because these people don't have other options.
Really very insightful. Thank you so much.
I think we should leave it there.
Yeah.
On that note, let me thank Andrei. I thought that was terrific talk, and for everybody for coming and great questions. And увидимся. Okay. Thank you. It's good. И она сама старалась чтобы нашли выход для них.